Welcome to Self-Perfected.
And we could do the event in the yard where it's like, the Capitol.
Welcome,
Hang on.
everybody.
Go ahead, Christine.
Welcome to the Self-Perfected Drag Queen Story Hour with Camera Copia. What are we reading today?
Oh, you
Oh,
cut
I
your
was
hair.
I was just studying some of the words of my mentor, Martine Rothblatt.
That's such an interesting name, right? It's literally just like, I don't know what blot is, but it sounds like blood. It's like red blood.
Rothblatt.
Rothblatt. I don't know. I bet that is red blood.
Can I read something to you?
You can, I guess. I don't know. Can you? Do you know how to read?
Are you one of the
I'm
75% of Americans who can't read?
I'm going to ignore that. The Einstein of computing, Alan Turing, was the first to publish the idea that software was humanly conscious if it successfully passed itself off to humans as being humanly conscious. Today we call this the Turing test. In the words of his biographer, to avoid philosophical discussions of what mind or thought or free will were supposed to be, he favored the idea of judging a machine's mental capacity simply by comparing its performance with that of a human being. It was an operational definition of thinking, rather, as Einstein had insisted on operational definitions of time and space in order to liberate his theory from a priori assumptions. If a machine appeared to be doing as well as a human being, then it was doing as well as a human being. Our definition of human cyber consciousness tightens the Turing test to require that software persuade not just a single individual, but a small group of experts, and not simply with regard to casual conversation, but with regard to autonomy and empathy. I'll keep going real quick. One might criticize the Turing test by saying that, for example, he is claiming that if a wooden duck appeared to be doing as well as a real duck, then it was a real duck when it in fact obviously is not. But this criticism falls flat because Turing's whole point is that it is function being tested, not form. If a wooden duck swims as well as a real duck, then it is a real duck swimmer. If a machine thinks as well as a human thinker, then it is a human thinker.
So that's interesting.
So
That's like the whole premise of that movie Ex Machina.
it's
Right.
they're trying to argue that because this whole thing is about making something called a mind clone, which is like cloning your mind into a machine, and then the idea that that is actually maybe not you, but maybe it is you, but also it's like it's actually a human because it thinks like a human.
Damn.
So isn't
Some
that though
backwards
just
shit.
defining humans as thinking,
Yeah.
computation?
Wow. Hey, you said something the other day about Descartes, right? About how you were looking at when you were first discovering, or I guess studying rather, Descartes, how you were seeing the flaw within it of, do you want to say it?
Well, I remember taking this high school or this philosophy class in high school. It was like an elective class, and it was my favorite class. It turned out to be my favorite class. And we studied, we started at the beginning, the pre-Socratics, Greek philosophy, and kept going through, right, up to Hume and Berkeley and all that stuff, like all the way up, right? I don't remember where we stopped exactly, but anyways, it was a really cool class. And the teacher did a really good job of just because we didn't actually read a lot. We read some of the base text, but it wasn't that. It was more like the lecturer or the teacher lecturing and explaining the concepts, right? So it was just a fun class. And anyways, when we got to Descartes, it was really interesting because Descartes talks about okay, I don't know how much philosophy you guys have either not necessarily studied, but I just like heard about. And then like if you've heard of Plato, for example, they had this idea that like they were trying to figure out like what's real. I mean, that's what philosophers are supposedly trying to do, figure out what is reality, right? And so they were like, well, let's take a triangle, for example. What is a triangle? I say, well, it's 3 points with that form, it's a 3-sided figure, right? I said, well, you can define it abstractly, right? But does that figure, like, okay, there's 180 degrees between all the angles of a triangle, right? If you add them up. Are there actually any perfect triangles that exist?
No.
And so that was their whole point, was like, well, no, I mean, I'm not saying that's the whole point that Plato was saying, but this was one of the points. Like, we can't have a perfect triangle existing physically. There's gonna be some flaw with it, is the idea. So the only place a perfect triangle exists is in the abstract idea of a triangle. But yet that's the actual triangle. So they were like, maybe there's this realm of pure abstract ideas, and that is the actual reality. And we're just more like the shadows of that. We're like the incarnations of those pure abstract forms, but we're not. But then this world is not as real as that world, right? So in other words, philosophy was always looking at these, what is the real world? What is not, And you go to Descartes, and he had this idea about the mind versus like the physical reality. So you have like the mental realm, kind of like that Plato stuff, versus the physical realm. And so he just kept developing things to the point where they're like, well, there's just a fundamental gap between the two, like they're separate. And then that introduced this problem into philosophy of like, how do you bridge that gap? Because clearly there's some interaction between the two, but if they're fundamentally separate, how do you get from one to the other? Like, what bridges that gap, right?
Like how do you move your arm? How do you?
Yeah,
how do
well,
you-
it's like where, how, like, what's the actual, like, it's like almost like there's two separate realities that exist at the same time, and how do they connect with each other? What is that mechanism?
Yeah.
And so, that introduced a problem into philosophy. People trying to figure that out. So then, obviously there's a lot of context there, but you start going into all that and you're like, what was the point? Why did we bring it up?
Oh,
Because I was just trying to get the context about it.
Marching
But I had
off
this
left.
insight.
Yeah.
I honestly don't remember the thought process, but I just remember having this insight of like, without even having that much context yet, of like, oh, that concept is what causes all the problems in our world somehow. Like I somehow intuited that. And I'm sure there was more to why I thought that. But I was only like 16, so it wasn't like I knew a lot of shit about anything, but somehow I kind of just had this intuition about it. And so, yeah, why did we bring that up though?
Well, you're talking about
Because-
what makes a human is the thinking, or is it just
that's what that book is setting up, is that the human is just the thinking, which is like, that is where that kind of philosophy stems from. I think, therefore I am. Like, that is okay. You think, therefore you are. So just because you're thinking, that's what makes you human. That's what makes you real. That's all you are, really, and everything else is just sort of like extra. Like, I don't know. Oops. There we go.
Yeah, that's interesting. What is, do you know? I mean, obviously you've studied that book in depthly, Cameron. So do you know Martin Rothblatt's take on, like, if it's a thinking that makes you the human, well, what the fuck else is everything else from a human?
So,
By the way,
yeah,
Rothblatt means red leaf. I looked it up.
thank God you told us that. I was wondering.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was thinking it was red blood.
me too. But it's red leaf.
Wow, you're trying to spread
It's
misinformation.
Rothblatt. Blatt.
Black.
Okay, so what were we talking about? Oh yeah, okay. So I was doing a lot of tedium over the past few days, like, because obviously we're getting ready for the event. For those of you who haven't noticed, repping the merch. Don't worry, these shirts no longer exist. These are like the OG, like,
Yeah, that's like going
ones
in the
that
Hall
fall
of Fame
apart
one
and
day.
so forth.
Those are
Right? So
vintage now.
if you were to get a self-perfected shirt now, they would not fall apart like so.
Cameron
So
did also
It was just the one that
put
was
it in
in
the
my
dryer one
dresser.
time.
That
right?
just lets
Didn't
you
it-
know
That's
the
gonna be
ones
worth
that
a
fall
lot of
apart.
money.
Exactly.
What?
Exactly. They're gonna
They're
be
gonna
worth
be
a
wo-
lot of money.
Worth a lot of money.
Yeah.
They're going to
'cause-
be worth
Yeah.
1 million Bitcoin.
Mm,
Especially if they have a little oil stain on it, you know?
You just
That's
described
like
every shirt that I
real,
own.
real authentic. Yeah.
we have
I
some
keep
of the
having to
shirts I
buy
used to own.
jeans. Okay, I keep having to buy new jeans, even though I don't particularly like care about having like a bunch of pairs of jeans, because I'll put my jeans on and I'll be doing something and then I'll be like, oh yeah, I need to paint that. And I'll be like painting for an hour. And then my pants will be covered in paint. And I'm like, oh. So anytime we're
Cameron,
gonna go
that's a
somewhere, I have to go buy
style
another pair of
nowadays.
jeans.
Did you not know that?
No?
Like probably in your day, back when you were 16 in your philosophy class, it was just like, I don't even know. You're just wearing Levi's or whatever the fuck. Nowadays, you should see the pants these kids have. They like pay extra money for paint stains.
They could literally just
Oh.
buy some jeans and go paint.
That's way too much fucking work.
Whoa.
Now I'm
They're just
really
trying to
like
have the
sound like an old
image in their
person.
mind.
Well, I could take some jeans and rip holes in them for you if you want, you know. That's the thing when I was a kid was the ripped jeans.
Yeah. And adults would say that. They'd be
Oh,
like,
wow, I really sound like an old person now.
Damn.
I've crossed the bridge.
That's it. That's it. You're old now. But yeah, that point of transhumanism, I see how it like connects with, okay, this is where they want to take us. They want to take us to, or at least what's being promoted. They want to take us to this point of you're just thinking, so it's okay. You can just upload your consciousness to the machine, and you know that's just as good as being alive. You are
It's
alive.
so obvious to me. Okay, but now I realize why it's not obvious to everyone. Okay, and this has a lot to do with this point. Okay, so I'll give you some more context. Okay, so as I was setting it up, I was doing a lot of tedious work over the past few days, getting ready for, you know, we're going on this trip. All this stuff needs to be done around the property. So I'm listening to a lot of stuff, and I came across this guy named Christopher Langan, which probably none of you have heard of. Maybe you've heard of, I doubt it. And he's this, apparently, he's like got the highest IQ ever recorded. I don't know whether that's true or not. Doesn't really matter, but that's the claim. And he has created something, he calls it the CTMU. It's the cognitive theoretic model of the universe. And it's like you could call it like a philosophy about what is reality. And there's a lot of specific vocabulary that goes into it. And what's interesting about it, I'll just give this, is like, so first of all, he's totally rejected by like the mainstream. Like any mainstream person, he's not credentialed. He never went to, I don't know if he went to university or not. I don't think so. But I'm not even going to say he's smart. Like he's obviously very smart. Like you could just tell when you listen to someone, whether they're intelligent or not. But he has a lot of really cool points. So he has this whole theory that he's developed over, I think since like the 80s is when he started developing it. And I'll say this, having studied it for a little bit, it's the closest thing that I can see in terms of a philosophical point, although there are some differences. It's like from a philosophical perspective of being aligned with destiny. There are some subtle points though, and I was going to talk about that if we get into it or not. But and the only reason I think it's really interesting, remember we talked about last week, we talked about like the 100 gex and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like the reason I bring stuff like that up is because I can see that's something that sucks people in.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of like a way of addressing it before anyone gets sucked into it. Not that I think necessarily someone's going to listen to our podcast, or something like that. It's just more of like speaking it out into existence. You know what I mean? Talking about it. And also it's like a larger pattern. And so like this stuff with this guy, Chris Langan, is pretty interesting because like that, I don't know if I can really articulate it effectively, but without the other person having all the context. But that idea of the mind and the physical reality, call it the body. They call it the mind-body gap. The idea of there being a gap there, he said the way you solve it is by just obviously realizing that the mind and the body exist inside of the greater reality together. Like they're not two separate realities. They are separate, yet they're within the same thing.
Yeah.
And so, go ahead.
For somebody who's like just listening to this first and then maybe might go explore that without the context, I like the analogy that he gives of if you're looking at a billboard or if you're a mathematician looking at a math problem, it's not like that math problem just exists and you're just observing it. It's like you're actually participating in solving that problem in your mind and interpreting it, and that's part of the interaction of it. So it's not just this exists on its own. Like you as a human being are a participant within the interactions of everything that's going on in this world, all the physical things in this world, right? And so you interpret that in your mind. And so just that point of the physical and the mind, they exist within the same realm, within the same universe. They're part of all the same thing. It's not one is separate from another and they're like, oh, they exist parallel to each other. So,
one important part that I think is a helpful piece of vocabulary for people to have is the word holon, HOLON. And it's I didn't know it was actually from Bohm, David Bohm.
What are you saying?
No, hold on. Like you gotta say it with that, like, little slang to it.
Hold up, like that.
Yeah,
No, hold on.
That's
Hold
what
on.
I said. Oh, okay, I will.
And but I first heard about it from Ken Wilber and his theory of everything.
Oh, you studied Ken Wilber?
Oh yeah, dude.
You never told me that.
Yeah. I
That's
got
crazy,
into it from
dude.
Alex Gray though. So you ever look at the Alex Gray paintings?
Yeah.
That shit.
I was super into Ken Wilber, like maybe a
Is that why
month
you shaved
before
your
I
head?
started. No, like maybe
I'm just kidding.
maybe a month before I started studying Destiny.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I like read all
it
his
kind of
stuff,
leads it all. I mean, all roads lead to Destiny.
That's what I'm saying. All that stuff I
yeah.
studied, like it was like now I have all this context so that when I studied Destiny, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. So like a holon is a whole part. So a really simple example of looking at it would be like you look at a atom, right? And then that's it. It's a whole thing in itself, but it's also part of a molecule. And then a molecule is also, let's say, part of a cell. So a molecule is a whole thing in itself, but it's also part of a cell. And then a cell is a whole thing in itself, but it's also part of an organ. Organ's a whole thing in itself, it's part of a human. Human's a whole thing in itself, but it's part of a society, right? And then society is all part of the world. It's like, that's what we've been saying from day one is you can't ignore the fact that we're all part of the same thing, which is this earth and this existence. So everyone's like, oh, I know my purpose. It's to be a fucking artist. It's like, that's not your fucking purpose. If you want to make art, cool. Your purpose is to align yourself with what's best for everything, And I just found once I could see that, it was like a higher level of thinking, maybe not higher level, but it's just like a way to look at reality where you can now see, oh, this is one way to understand what's going on. And it's interesting because now I'm looking at this whole transhuman thing. And it's like they're missing the whole fucking point that like your cells of your human body is part of you. I mean, maybe they make the argument that somehow you're actually a part of you is the fucking computer circuits. If you were to download yourself into a computer.
Well, there's one more part they're missing. Okay, I agree with you, but there's one more part, and I want to get into that in a second. But I want to give some more context. So, okay, what was the point we were talking about right before you brought up the holon thing?
Cameron, this is so fascinating. I've never heard you ask that question more than once. I think this is like a collective revenge of the ego. Like Cameron's so clear. It's like the system is coming in. Like
no, I'm just trying to like
Cameron,
go back
think
to
about the fact that you have to paint that fucking barn before you leave.
Well, so this guy, okay, so this guy Chris Langan, he has this whole point about, and this is something I think we'll all agree with. He makes this point that science, when you look at science, is obviously we know it's like a method or a process, but it also means something else. Like when we say science, we mean like this collective action of a bunch of people who kind of have a similar way of looking at the world. You know what I mean? It is sort of like a religion in a way. It has like a bigger context than just the process itself. Like the body of science, all the scientists that know each other and so forth. But even within the process of it, okay, like remember we talked one time about like string theory, for example, and like a long time ago. He was making this point how the mainstream science, let's say, tries to figure out the fundamental unit of reality. I mean, we've all heard about that in school, even like, oh, they try to, it's the atom, or no, it's the proton, or is it strings, or is it quantum gravity, or like what's the most fundamental particle or unit of reality, right?
Yeah.
But it's looking at it as if the most fundamental unit of reality is some kind of object that you can identify as like just like a piece, like a Lego.
Yeah.
But doesn't that imply that your conception of reality is that it's just like a set of Lego bricks that are kind of just randomly being combined together? Right? This is really the idea of evolution, right? And yeah, just like the kind of mechanistic atheistic view of reality is that it's just like a physical thing, set of things, and you could just they're just all kind of rocks bumping together randomly, and they form more complex things sometimes and whatever. Okay, but let me ask you guys before I say what I think, like, what is that missing?
The interplay of the observer, how the observer is part of it and the rest of everything, because it's all interconnected.
Okay. But then even within quantum mechanics and a lot of stuff, they talk about the observer, right? There's an observer, but they even treat the observer as sort of just another block.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And what I see them really, and this guy, Chris Langan, makes this point too, but he says it in a really specific way. He says the fundamental quanta, like the fundamental unit of reality, is beings. Think about that. Not a building block, but it's beings. And beings are integral or like necessary to reality to make reality exist and process and change and unfold and so forth. It's not just we're observing something.
Yeah.
We are embedded in reality, and it's unfolding according to the choices that the being is making in reality based on its limitations of its position and constraints physically and so forth, but it's making decisions. It's not just the observation part, it's there's a aspect of reality that includes not just all the physical stuff, but beings themselves that they use this term a lot, like him and the people who follow him, because I've watched a lot of videos of people who follow his stuff and read his stuff and all that. They use the term consciousness a lot. But then I was listening to this one video and the guy kept kind of switching it to say sentience. And I was like, that's a lot closer. We would say awareness, because consciousness is like a system, a program, versus like awareness is just that pure, I'm aware of something. And then you can make decisions based on that. But the consciousness is more of it's like become something where it's like more of a controlled computer algorithm like system, right?
Right.
So
okay, here's a question that it might seem unrelated, but it's totally related. So you know how we've been studying some of the Lao Tzu stuff because he was one being who was pretty freaking clear. There's a line where he says, "To a mind that is still, the whole universe surrenders." Now, how I interpret that is, if you're just here as your being, as you, equal to reality, you can therefore create as your being equal in one with and as reality.
Yeah.
Right. And there's one other line, which is if you know how to be satisfied, then you're rich. I've really been looking at that point too, but how do you see that now within the context of understanding it is all beings and the mind fucks it up?
Can I say something to that first line? It's like, if to a mind that is still, the universe surrenders, right? It's like, have you ever had songs just like fucking pop into your head or thoughts or whatever, and they're just fucking like, oh,
No.
then this thought, and then never. Wow, dude, universe.
Just Baroque classical music.
yeah, you got
but
like Skrillex running 24/7 in your head. I know, man.
Yeah, you fucking liar.
He's like, oh, you
You're the
mean
one who
like
told me to listen to
songs?
the Quest for Fire. Yeah, no.
Hold on, let me pause that
real
real quick. What's up?
No, it's 100 gex, guys.
Yeah, right.
Money
but
machine.
that one's terrible. But yeah, like those thoughts that's your mind not being still, right? It's like or intrusive thoughts. People have those all the time. It's like, where you're like, oh, what if I were to just walk out in front of this bus or like kick this pregnant lady in the stomach? I don't know. Like people have those intrusive thoughts. Like those are thoughts that are your mind not being still. That's examples rather of your
Well,
mind
like
not being still.
anxieties, desires, things that are like coming
Yeah.
in to push you into a certain path that you're not
Right.
really just like directing.
Yeah. So when you can still your mind, or rather, when you are really clear and you've walked through all your points, then you are able to direct yourself effectively without being cajoled or prodded or persuaded by your fucking mind to do some bullshit or just run your program. But yeah, the second question I'll let Cam answer that one.
What was the second question?
It was something about like,
Oh, if you know how to be satisfied, then you're rich, which is obviously an interpretation from whatever version of Chinese he spoke or whatever. But like, that's an interesting point too, because you see how if you look at that with consciousness, you'd just be like, oh, great, I'll just be satisfied. Therefore, I'm rich. And it's like, it's not really self-honest about it, as opposed to being satisfied in the sense of realizing like you're complete as who you are, as your beingness, and therefore you can experience the richness of life that's here, because we
And
are
you can
in an
direct
abundant world.
things.
Was it?
And you can direct things. Like if you see
Mhm.
something that, you could use the term injustice, something that is like not best, you could then direct it rather than being like, oh, I got something better to do. That's like that whole point of what's my purpose? Like trying to find your purpose rather than just my purpose is I'm here and I'm looking around and okay, am I satisfied with what I see? Like, and also it's like, what does it mean to be satisfied if there's another person suffering because of something that you're allowing? How can you be satisfied?
Hmm.
So is it to be interpreted in a spiritual way of like, oh, I'm just going to feel satisfied, I'm going to be in a state of being satisfied, and then I am rich, so I don't need to do anything? That justifies like just meditating, you know what I mean? But
That's
yeah.
literally knowing how to be satisfied truly is the equal money system. It's effective education, equal money, and then you're
Right.
rich.
Right. It's
Wow.
like, so being able to, but also if you're in the, let's call it the chaos of this, the experiences that we all go through currently in this world, in this system that we're in, can we be satisfied within that and not constantly be searching for an escape? Do you know what I mean? Because there's all these offerings of like, oh, do this, do that to be satisfied, rather than just focus,
Yeah.
That's my
cool.
perspective.
That's cool. Okay. So then what was the point Cameron was talking about with the CTMU?
He was talking about like beings and
Yeah.
just bringing that point of
Yeah.
awareness.
And there's kind of a point I'm trying to get to. I'm just trying to build context of like cool points
just
I
to be
saw from
clear,
it.
you're saying in the Chris Langan thing, his take is the most fundamental unit is beings?
Yeah.
Or okay, cool.
So
I'm like
and
halfway
he
through that
calls
answer.
it identity operators, but it's like
Mm.
it's like I mean, there's so much context. I'm just trying to get like some points across without, I'm not like trying to give some exposition of his whole philosophy or something. It's just more of, again, there's a kind of point I'm trying to get at. But I'm kind of also wanting to show like, what are some of the points where I see like it matches up and it actually makes sense. And I saw an interview with him where he was talking a lot of shit about the whole transgender thing. He was really talking more about the transhuman thing. And this is the tie-in to that point is, if you reject the idea of the being, then it could be easy in a way to fool yourself into thinking that a machine can be alive, and that therefore your way to live forever must be to somehow merge with a machine, because machines can be physically upgraded and keep, you keep replacing parts and so forth, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the human body, they don't know how to do that. And then, and I remember there was one interview I was listening to where the guy was like talking about the whole transhuman thing. And he was like, I forget the way he phrased it, but he was kind of bringing up the point of how, these guys like Kurzweil and Rothblatt and so forth, they're, looking at uploading, human consciousness into a machine or whatever. And then like the guy just laughs. And he's like, why are you laughing at it? Like, and he's like, he said, there's no theory behind it. Like, it's literally just this grasping a hope of like, I think somehow like, maybe machines, we could just merge into machines, but there's no theory that says that actually makes sense. Like, I understand how reality works, and therefore I know this is a possibility. They have no theory of understanding reality that is coherent to justify that is a real thing. And so that's why, to me, it's so obvious to me that it's not possible. It's not possible to upload yourself into a machine and live forever. It is not physically possible, because you don't understand how the mechanism works that makes your being inhabit a body. And if you're like, what being? There's no being. Then obviously you could go to the point of thinking, oh, it's just your mind, right? It's just data. It's just information. So if I could just copy that data information, but the whole point when you study Desteni, you realize that stuff is just information. When I die, that doesn't exist anymore. Who I am as a being would go into another context of reality that's not the same context of inhabiting a body, being within and as a body. It'll be a different context. And so the memories which were stored within and as my body are not going to be there. And I'm not going to be in that same position in reality. So the context of me being Cameron and being related to my parents and my kids and so forth, that those relationships exist as being in this body. They're not directly related to me as a being. It's kind of like a guy who thinks he's the CEO of McDonald's. What happens when he gets fired and gets replaced? Is he still anything to do with McDonald's? No. He's like, well, I'm going to pick up and go be the CEO over here. And suddenly he's at he's at odds with McDonald's all of a sudden. Not saying that it should be a combative at odds thing when you're not in this body. I'm just saying your memories and your belief, your ideas and your thoughts and everything is specific to the body you're in because of the programming and where you were born and all this stuff.
Your position in the world, literally.
And so imagine though, in something like this, they're like, your memories, that's you, and you can upload those. I'm like, that's just, do you also see how it's so self-focused and isolated? Like this memory of me having a brother who's a World War II vet or a Vietnam vet or something. I'm saying that because that was one of the examples. Like that's a valuable memory and it means something to that person, but that's just because of that specific set of experiences that person was born into. It's not a universal thing. So they're not identifying with anything universal at all. They're purely identifying with an individual like experience of being born into this body, and that's what's important in their memory. So they're trying to continue that. And it's like, that's not who you actually are.
It's super interesting when you look at it from the perspective of they're trying to create an AI or an AI universe that will allow you to live out like, okay, they're going to use all this computational power to then store all of your memories just for that purpose. When we could be using all this, like it's so self-centered. It's right. So self-centered, right?
And it's also self-defeating.
Yeah.
It's not even just like we're judging self-interest. It's self-defeating. It's not going to work.
It's not going to be supported for anyone really, because it's like, okay, you take all your fucking memories, you upload them into this machine and it has all your perspective. It's the same thing that interview that Jordan Peterson was having with that other guy, I forget his name, whatever, but how he was saying, we could have an AI that basically sees everything from your perspective, knows all the movies you've watched, all the books you've read, all the conversations you've had, how all these people have interacted with you, and it knows you essentially. So it's going to be able to combat all these other AIs coming to you. And so you could just have this AI go and make decisions for you or interact with other AIs for you, so you don't get persuaded, because that AI won't
Remember
be
that
persuaded.
Destiny interview, World War U,
Mhm.
right? And it's like, I'm just looking at it like, literally, they're like, we're just gonna all individually have to be like countries in World War III, like all fighting each other with AIs, and like it's not just like countries fighting each other. It's like every individual needs to have an AI that's like constantly fighting against all the world AI, and it's like it's just a big fucking world war.
Yeah.
Like that's what they're suggesting, is we need to prepare for that. And I'm like, really? That's the fucking answer? Like you just want to be stuck into that game?
It's really crazy because it's like you won't be interacting with reality anymore. You'll only be interacting with your own
Like,
AI.
what will you do?
Yeah. Like,
Oh,
if your
I see
AI
what
is
your point is. You'll just be interacting with your AI. Like, okay, AI, what happened in reality? Like,
right.
and you're like gonna be isolating yourself just to like us. Imagine you're not even interacting with your relatives or like your kids or anything. You're just, your AI is interacting with their AI.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the world that's fucking being created right now.
It's
People
so
will do
funny.
it out of fear.
It's just so much like when you study the Destiny interviews, like explaining like the afterlife and like, you know, with the beings when you go in a different context and they get like lost in different dimensions and stuff. It's so funny because it's literally what the metaverse is. They're like, come on, come into this metaverse reality. And you're like, I'm the king of the world. I'm the king of the metaverse. And you're just in like a little waiting room.
Yeah. When you study the whole creation of heaven and all of that with Anu, all that aspect, right? It might sound crazy, but you're literally watching it happen right now,
I was gonna say,
just
wouldn't
in the
you
context of the
almost
reality we're in, huh?
describe it as like the Akashic records? It's like now we're trying to make our own
Right.
actual
It's an
physical
attempt at that.
version
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
That's
that.
Wow.
hilarious.
Wow.
Like,
That is yeah, that's what this whole uploading thing is. So what
wait.
yeah.
I don't want to miss this moment. Imagine, imagine actually that is what the Akashic records were. Like literally, we already built an AI,
That
created
is,
they created the Akashic records, right? And then just like, oh, hey, let me just delete this program. Boom, it went, and now we're like, we
okay.
need to rebuild the Akashic records. Like
Like,
that is what we're here to do.
it's very difficult for people, like maybe when they start studying Destiny, and then Bernard talks about deleting the white light or something, and you're like, I don't know, that sounds like fantasy, but it's like, again, you're in a reality. The reality you see is within reality. It's just the reality you see isn't all of reality.
Mhm.
But to me, the story is no more interesting. It's kind of mundane. It's like if somebody was like, I'm at the headquarters of the metaverse, and I'm like, and I have the ability to pull the plug. I'm like, no, fuck this. This is over. It's like the same kind of level of that. It's like, I have the password. I know how to turn it off. And then you see, like, imagine you're in the Matrix and you're like, I could literally push the button and everybody wakes up. Or starts the process of waking up and going like, what the fuck is this? Doesn't mean something. They're like, oh, cool, awesome, let's work together. They're like, where the fuck are we? Like, what is this shit? Like, what do we do now? That's kind of more like it is.
Yeah, and it's so simple too, because when you see the beingness thing, when you realize the fact that you're a being in your body looking out at reality, consider that you've been programmed since a young age. Disney movies, billboards, your parents, whatever. So your being got sucked into little alternate realities along the way. And now all of a sudden, like I remember as a kid, I watched Power Rangers and I'm like, in my mind, thinking I'm in a Power Rangers battle for 4 years of my life. As
Which color Ranger were you?
I would switch between all of them, except obviously not the pink and the yellow one. But I was like,
Why is that obvious? How would that be obvious? I don't
he's a boy. Can't be pink Power Ranger.
Okay,
He's like,
the pink
yeah,
and the
I hate
yellow
yellow.
one were weak
Whoa,
compared to the
transphobe?
other men.
Transphobe bunch? Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But see,
Yeah.
it's like a perfect example of like that's what had happened up until now is we're all this beingness within our own bodies, but that beingness had got channeled into alternate realities that aren't fucking real.
there's an interview on the Destiny website with Jesus where he talks about, like, he's like, I came to Earth to tell everybody, like, you're trapped in these pictures, like you're identifying with these pictures, right? And when you study the Chris Langan stuff, he just calls it objects. It's like everybody is like stuck and fixated on the objects, and they're not seeing, like, their model of reality is not equal to the actual fucking reality that exists. So they're not seeing everything. And that point you brought up, Mitch, of like, you know, your life looking through these eyes or whatever, right? A being is looking through the part that, obviously without giving all the context. So if somebody was interested, they could go look at it. But I guarantee most people, if they were to start trying to study that stuff, go ahead.
They're not going to understand it at all. Like the vocabulary is like beyond anything you've ever fucking listened to or read. I guarantee you're going to look at it, you're going to get bored within the first 30 seconds, and you're going to go, what the fuck is this guy saying? Unless you use your TT. But I'm not going to suggest to even do that, because
it's not necessary.
It's not necessary. You have all the.
That's why I'm addressing
material
it, because it's like, don't go and get trapped in it, right?
Yeah, don't do that. It would be really silly. I would suggest go into, you know, studying Destiny material. If you haven't read all the blogs, read all the blogs. That is enough for you to understand and just go, I need to use my TT for that. That's actual beneficial use of your time.
And here's why. Because it's not that at a certain point, maybe it's cool to look at it or whatever. It's just, it's not, okay. I'll talk about what I see as the big pitfall. And I see this also from looking at the people who follow him and talk about his work. So the kind of thing that he speaks against, like the transhumanists, the Ray Kurzweils, the Martin Rothblatts, all that stuff, it's like the whole problem with it is that they don't recognize the aspect of the being, but what he calls it is God. Now, he doesn't say that your being is God, but he says God is your highest identity. But then in his philosophy, he proves that God exists. Okay. Of course, you could say, well, what the fuck does he mean by the word God? And what's fascinating about it is, and I think even he falls into this trap himself, but all the people I look at that follow his stuff, they all end up going, oh, I need to believe in God. And God, they don't necessarily say it this way, but they actually end up participating in the God as a higher power. And that if I displease God, I will go to hell. The way he describes hell is you just get deleted, which is fascinating when you look at the overlap with Destiny. But the problem is, it's like, when I listen to what he says, like his philosophy, I'm like, I actually don't see a problem. But for some reason, even him and everybody else still interprets it as there's a God in some way that's like, because what he basically says is that, okay, you as a being, you have an identity, right? And you are the thing that processes reality. You are the thing causing the quantum wave function to collapse. You're the thing that's causing reality to process at the level you're at. And so God is just the highest form of that is the entire physical, not just physical, it's the entire universe, all of reality itself. That is God. And everything is, he calls it holography, but it's like, you could think of it kind of like, it's not really the holon thing, but it's like, you as a being have an identity. So he's saying God as the reality itself also has an identity. So you could think of it like a being in itself that is aware of things. But I would say that the limitation of that is that it can't really be aware of much, because all it can be aware of is of itself as a totality. And there's nothing outside of it. Like you as a being, you are aware of yourself, but aren't you aware of things outside of you? Mm-hmm. So even though we know there is no technical outside and inside, we still exist in that duality of inside, outside, right? But then there is a reality in which we're in. So it's all still one thing. Now, the problem with what I see with his philosophy is it takes all of the subtle implicit bias that we all have of wanting to believe in a higher power that will take care of us and fix everything. and his proof becomes the proof that exists, even though I don't think that's his point, his starting point.
It's
Because
definitely
it's
not,
Yeah,
because
go
he
ahead.
also shits on all the other religions about how they're missing so much. They're lacking, like what he talks about with it's almost, there's this idea within people of faith being divorced from knowledge. And he's like, it doesn't make any fucking sense, because you're just gonna go and have faith in something with no knowledge of it. So like there's no
Right.
logic to it. Actually, you're
Right.
saying there is no logic here.
And that's the same thing with the transhumanism and the transgender. You're having a faith that you somehow know that you were born in the wrong body, but you don't really understand how all that works. Like, okay, so what does it mean you were born in? Well, my consciousness has a gender. Do you understand how that actually mechanically works? Like, meaning, do you actually understand what your consciousness is and how it would have a gender or not? Like, is it something separate from your physical body and it has a gender? Like, it's just it sounds good enough. And it kind of is in alignment with how I feel. So I'll just go with it. Does that make sense? And that's how most people come to religions, is that it's good enough. They don't really, it's like I've always talked about this. I've talked about in the podcast of like, when people are like, Jesus got on the cross and died for our sins. And I'm like, can you explain the mechanics of that to me, of how the process of him dying, like, physically made your sins go away? Like, what is the actual mechanism that occurred? You don't know that. You're just believing that that's what happened.
I can tell
It's
you
like Santa Claus.
The way that I thought of it was like, it's a sacrifice. And then like here's I'll take you down my road, right? There's a sacrifice. You sacrifice to God, just like Abraham was sacrificing goats or whatever to God, and then he was going to sacrifice his own son to God. And so, but God actually sacrificed his own son to himself. Wait a minute.
Yeah, but that's still not explaining the mechanism.
Wait. Listen, people have made sacrifices since, ancient Greeks. The Greeks were making sacrifices where they would like tie up hide with like a fucking tail on the top and all that shit. Like, there were sacrifices made to please the gods, and then God would just do things for you. That's a sacrifice. So like that's the mechanism.
I mean, I guess the mechanism would have to be, you did something to show that you feel like the God is more important and you're not in control. So therefore he was like, all right, cool, I'll go ahead and fix that for you, because he knows how to do it.
Right.
That's kind of the idea.
You ever bring something to your parents and you're like, I really fucking tried, I don't know what to do, please, and you beg them, right, and then they give you some money? That's how that works. God's just giving you money. It's like the Santa Claus thing, because it's like, okay, if I'm good, then Santa Claus brings me presents. And you don't really consider, like, how does he bring the presents? Like, how are they actually made? Well, he's got elves. So his elves are making your G.I. Joe toys that clearly are in a package with a barcode on it.
That's made in China.
That was clearly bought in a store.
Chinese elves.
But it's like, you're like, it doesn't matter, because I'm told if I believe this will happen. And so you're not looking at the mechanism behind it.
Right. And there's so much fear in it too. Because I mean, in your first 7 years, when you're wide open little sponge, you get physically programmed in your body with the ultimate sales pitch. You're good in some weird, ambiguous way. You live forever and it's bliss forever. You bad?
Yeah.
You're in hell forever.
And what do we know? What do I know? Every single person at some level is afraid of
dying,
being deleted.
Yeah. Death. What happens when you die? Being deleted, not existing, basically not existing. Right. So here, I'll get to the point about the crystalline stuff. And then, like, he has this really cool conception of what evil is and what hell is. And it's just the point that you've totally rejected God, which is not anything fundamentally different than any fucking religious person ever said. But in his philosophical conception of it, it's like you're not living as that highest identity, and therefore you're not that, and therefore that can't see you anymore. It doesn't recognize you anymore. So you're a expression that does not need to exist anymore, because it's not in alignment with that thing. So it's like, and he made this point of like, God always has to be perfect. God always has to express itself as perfection, because that's what it is. And so if something is less than that, it can't continue to allow it. It's not even like I don't want to. It's like I can't. It's like if you're walking a tightrope and you have something that's putting you out of balance and you have to move forward. What has to happen is the thing has to fall away for it to move forward. It has to. Otherwise, it will pull it off. It's not even that, because that's kind of like there's a choice being made. So it's cool. When I was listening to that, I'm like, okay, cool. He's getting there. But then he'll say something like, and that's why people like Richard Dawkins, who hate God and profess that there is no God, is like, if you even say there is no God and you blame God for all the evil in the world because he doesn't stop it, you've turned yourself away from God. I'm like, now you're using fear. Now you're using fear that, like, it's almost like this. No, I've figured out the evolution of what God really is and what it really means. And it's not all the kind of bullshit in religion per se, but they're all trying to get to that. But then it ends up just being this point of like, you have to just, you can't reject God. You have to accept God as a reality. And I'm like, okay, that's the fucking criteria.
It doesn't
Like,
really
don't
make a
reject
lot of
God, accept
sense.
God as reality. Like, I agree. People who are like, I'm totally anti, like, there is no God, like nothing matters, it's all random. Yes, like, you're missing the point, because again, that's what leads to all this stuff. It leads to the idea that, well, I mean, the only way for me to live forever is to fucking make machines and AI and robots and get everybody to power these AIs for me so I can live for. That's obviously retarded. But so here's my whole point. It's like, I came across on the internet, from what I could see in terms of what's out there, the most advanced philosophical expression for what reality is that can be done from a purely philosophical, mathematical type method. And it's like almost there, but it still ends up, like, I don't know Chris Langan. I don't know what he actually thinks or whatever. Maybe some things he says I'm misinterpreting, but I'm looking at the effect it has on all the people who follow him. And all the people I see that follow him are all like, and that's why, I'm a Christian and I'm saved by Christ. And like,
Wait, what?
I'm like, what? And here's the problem with it. Okay, let's say this one intellectual, no, you don't know what I mean by saved by Christ. It's not the thing everybody else thinks. Okay, but you're still now putting up a point that's justifying everybody else who's not as intellectually whatever as you are to just continue participating in all that shit. And nothing's going to fucking change. And that's the biggest problem I see with it. I'm not blaming Chris Langan or his theories, because I'm like, oh man, this is so cool. Like, there's so many points in here. Like the concept of, if you're not equal as God, you're deleted. But then it still has this really subtle point. I don't think it's necessarily a flaw within his logic. It's more like this, it's like a virus inside the mind and the consciousness of the person that's like, but I still need at some level for there to be a higher power, because it's like, you know what it misses? It totally misses the point of, how do we solve this problem so that everyone collectively realizes this point? And since that's obviously not possible, I have to, at some level, just go back to the point of the God thing that is reality will sort it out. And like, as long as I accept that I realize that, and I don't just totally turn myself away from it, somehow I'll continue. And I think that's probably good enough. But it's like, when I listen to the people who follow him, they're like, yeah, and that's why I believe this, and I'm like, there's still obviously so much fucking doubt, and they're still clearly not facing that point of, and I'm not blaming them. Like, what I realize is the reason why it's not a problem for me and I don't go into that fear is because of the vocabulary that we have. And it's not about, it's like Drake said, if let's say the average person starts studying Chris Langan, he's going to be talking about self-dualism and holography and fucking identity operators and syndifiance, all this, and you're going to be like, what? And now, if you actually look at what the words mean, it's like, oh, okay, that's what it means. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But you'll shut down. But what I'm trying to say is, I'm not talking about that kind of vocabulary. I don't think that kind of vocabulary is necessary, because I was able to see all the things he's already saying without that specific vocabulary he has. And I can see the problems with what he's saying, the real subtle flaw that he has. It's not even like a logical thing. It's like a irrational bias point within him and within everybody. That is the same thing that Anu took advantage of. And he explained it like, everybody within them had this belief that there is a higher power. So I just became that. and then got everyone to accept it.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I wanted to bring all this up because it's like all roads lead to destiny. Because like, and now I'm seeing, I was talking with Avery about it, and he's like, yeah, we could just bridge that gap of like, he's like almost there, and all those people. And the other thing too is, remember how we talked a couple podcasts ago, I guess maybe, about remember John Vervaeke? He was that AI cognitive scientist guy, and he was talking about religion is the only thing historically that's been able to move humanity in like a big way into something new than it was before, and that's not necessarily for the better per se, but it is the thing that has been able, like philosophy hasn't been able to do that on its own. Even like certainly not music, even not politics, because you had to have some religious component to it. It's religion itself. And
would you include science in there as like a religion as well?
Right, because it has to take on a religious aspect.
Yeah.
And that's why it's easy to, even with like the transgenderism stuff, it's actually a religion. You may not think of it as a religion because it's not talking about God or something, but it's like it's a religion in that sense of there's certain basic premises that we just accept them. We don't really understand how it works, but we accept it. And then
it's interesting with like specifically with science, because it's like the vast majority of people, they have no fucking understanding of this proof or that or whatever. They're just seeing some numbers and they're like, I trust it, whatever. Like, I remember when I was a kid.
But it's like, if you say you trust science, that means you have to believe in string theory and whatever the competitor to string theory is, quantum loop gravity. I don't fucking know. Like, you have to believe all the competitors because they're all science and they're all using science. Like, how do you know which one is correct? And it's like realizing that's not a valid fucking, in the same way you're not allowed to say you trust science, you can't say you trust religion.
Yeah.
It's not funny how it works.
I remember as a kid seeing something that said people will trust that this star is X million light years away or whatever. But when they see a sign that says wet paint, they gotta touch it. They want to test it. And it's really interesting because it's like, yeah, to the level that you just accept that, and potentially because what difference does it make to you if it's however million or not? Like, it's like, whatever. But it's like a religious aspect where you'll just accept the canon of that religion. You'll just accept, oh yeah, yep, and then Jesus died for our sins, and Ishmael was born from Abraham, and that's where Islam comes from, whatever. It's like you just accept, yep, and this, that, okay, cool. And so I am a whatever. I am a scientist or atheist or whatever. I see, regardless, you're not any smarter or necessarily more logical than anyone else, but you believe you are, because and you've just accepted all these tenets of your quote unquote religion of science. I just wanted to put that in there because I see that point that you're saying, as far as like what moves people is religion, and science included as that is also part of that moving people, because they're not actually investigating and understanding for themselves of, oh, okay, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that because this logically leads to that or came from
it's
this.
Like, if you want people to do something, you have to create a story, and that doesn't mean the story has to be false, but there has to be a story that people buy into that has some meaning within it. Like, if you want everybody to fucking buy Christmas presents, that's why the Santa Claus story exists.
It's a great story.
But you know what I'm saying? Like, you could, if you just tell people, hey, go buy presents.
Why?
Yeah, it's like, but there has to be some religion. It's like Santa Claus is a religion.
Yeah.
It's the religion to get people to do a particular religious ceremony at a certain time of the year. It's a religion.
Which, man, if you think about it that way, it's like that religious ceremony then confers power to the high priests of that religion, which would be the companies, which would be, like basically like, oh, and the power that they're getting is all your fucking money. you know,
Like, what does the Catholic Church do with all the money?
buy
They go
land.
build stuff. Apparently, they go
Like, they'll
build
do a
homes for
little bit
people.
of like, quote unquote, helping people because they have to show something, I suppose. But then they fucking buy real estate and they build stuff and they, you know what I mean? Like, they own a lot of shit. So it's like that's the power being conferred to the high priest point. It's like literally they're just every week collecting more money so that they can fucking. It's like what's that guy? Grant
If you
Cardone.
think, if you
You know,
think about it,
people
it's
criticize
like
him because it's like he sells all this stuff, like
Yeah.
motivational sales type stuff, so that he can take all that and go build his real estate empire. I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying it's the same fucking game. Right? That's all it is.
It's genius from that perspective of like, if you're like in the money game, what they're doing is they've built a franchise for themselves. The same exact thing. It's like building an apartment building, because now you own the land and you're getting income from it on a regular basis. You know, it's not just, oh, we own all this land. It's we own this land, and every piece of real estate also adds money to our bank account every week, because people donate to churches every week, and they're like,
But it's like, what's the starting point of it? What's the point of it? Like, what is
Yeah.
the end purpose of the Catholic Church? How does it actually change anything fundamentally?
well,
Grant Cardone, same point. What?
they're the quote unquote value that they're giving is, they're like, hey, you came to our church and you received this message and it made you feel better, and you know, whatever.
It's like Grant Cardone's like, get out of the rat race, and the church is like, get out of the rat race of whatever, get out of the rat race of life and come to heaven.
Well, Grant Cardone, the value that you're getting is like, oh, I can live in this apartment building, but that value was already there. And it's predicated upon the point of there is lack and we don't have an equal money system. Like, you don't deserve the right to life. You don't deserve the right to having a home and having clean water or nutritious food or all the important things, or education, which the church or religion in general, the way that it's practiced today, is predicated upon the point that you don't deserve the right to education, which is huge. That's huge, because they will espouse like, oh yeah. You know, we want to go to Africa or Malaysia or whatever and give them, yeah, McDonald's got their business model from the church. Exactly. Like,
Yeah.
we'll give them this education or whatever, but it's literally just the education, quote unquote, that they're getting is how to be a manager at McDonald's, like how to be a manager at the church, how to be a priest, how to be like somebody who comes to the church and gives us money. That's the only education that they're actually getting. It's really indoctrinating someone into your religion is exactly what it is.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just making that point of what we're talking about is real education, which is fundamentally different than literally what anybody else understands, which would be the reason why, because I was also at this point of, I could just upload my consciousness into a robot and like that would be me, because that's how I understood myself with the education that I had, of just like, I am my thoughts. That is what I am, which I understand now is like that. It seems so ridiculous to me, but that's only because I've been able to educate myself through this process.
Yeah, it's like how you can only get to that and this is the part where Chris Langan has a really cool point. He's like, you have to be an atheist to get to that conclusion. You have to believe there's no God.
Mm-hmm.
And by God, meaning the universe is not just a object that exists and we're just kind of in it and we're just kind of like randomly a product of it.
Yeah.
Like the concept of God, that's cool. The part about it that's cool is that the universe is alive. It's a fucking thing that's alive, that makes decisions, and we are that thing. It's like we could identify as, I'm just me in this body and I'm just these thoughts and feelings and I'm just I'm just Cameron, I was born to these parents and I have these desires and feelings and so forth, or those are all things that were programmed into this body based on the environment. If the environment had been different, would I be different?
100%. And that's
Okay, so that's clearly not me.
right.
So what's the me that's in here? If I were able to swap out of my body and then go into Mitch's body, let's say we were able to swap places, wouldn't we realize and go, oh, now I'm experiencing myself in a total different context. I have different memories and different thoughts. And like, I feel differently about, but that's just because this body I'm in was based on these circumstances. And if the circumstances had been different that developed this body, it would be different. Interesting.
That's the extreme polarization, isn't it? It's like it's this extreme polarization that is actually the same thing of I'm not my physical body. That's why I'm like, I'm a woman trapped in this body or whatever. Like, it's like, oh, okay, I'm not my physical body. But then at the same time, it's like, oh, but I don't want to lose all my memories, which are clearly only possible in that physical body. It's the same fucking thing. And
We're like, it was like, oh,
she's
and we're
back.
back. That was just a subtle way of getting Mitch out of here.
Did yours not cut out, Drake?
No, not at all.
That is so weird.
It was just your internet?
literally just mine.
Wow.
Weird. How does that work though? Does it make two separate recordings or does it just like have one that's like,
It'll make two separate recordings, but then for yours, right?
I don't think so.
Oh,
Because
okay,
I've started
we'll
and
see.
stopped by accident and it's still one file.
it still just puts it together?
Yeah.
All right. Well, anyways, for those of you who are wondering what's going on, our recording cut out because Christine's doing the recording and for some reason her internet went out.
We
Well,
don't
we're
need
back.
to
Damn, I went through
acknowledge-
all that work. Are you kidding me?
Oh yeah, but
What were you-
think about this. I was talking about I went to this meeting one time. It was for something totally unrelated to God or anything, but it was in a church, and then clearly a lot of people were like religious. So like they started with like the Pledge of Allegiance and some other stuff, and then they were like, let's do a prayer. And so they did some like quick prayer thing, and then they were like, does anyone have any prayer requests, to be on your prayer list or whatever? Yeah, it wasn't Low Rotary Club, but anyways, it doesn't matter. But it was like that. And somebody goes, yes, I have a prayer request for me and my brother. And they were like, what is it about? And they were like, well, I don't want to say what it is, but if you could just put us in there. And I'm like, how does this fucking work? Like, I don't need to know what I'm praying for. I just need to know that you have a problem and I'm just going to pray for you. What? That can't be an actual fucking mechanism that makes any sense. Because
How many
Positive
times
if
have
it
you
works
done
like
this?
that,
Cameron.
why do I even need to pray? And what does pray mean? Like, it's just like so obviously.
You know who brought that up? That interview you sent me with Eliezer Yudkowsky.
I
Right?
remember that.
He was saying like when he was a kid,
Oh yeah,
his parents were telling
he
him like
grew
when
up
he's
Jewish,
6 years
like
old,
Orthodox
yeah,
or whatever.
they were telling him to pray, and he was like, "But I don't speak Hebrew. I don't know what I'm saying." They're like, "Doesn't matter, just pray anyway." He's like,
They said as
"Oh."
long as it's in Hebrew, God understands it. And
He's like, "But I don't understand what the fuck I'm saying. Like, how does this make any sense? This doesn't make any fucking sense." And like he was just like, he's like, I realized that didn't make any sense. And I figured if there is a God, he's got to be smarter than me. So that just like completely dissolved my interest in religion.
So here's my point about the Chris Langan stuff is this idea that you need to recognize God and believe, and I don't know if he says believe, but a lot of people who follow him do. It's like you need to somehow believe God and you cannot reject God. If you say you reject, I mean, is saying I reject something the same as rejecting it?
No.
And so here's how I look at it. What does it mean to actually accept God? Is to accept the responsibility of God in the form you're in. It doesn't matter whether you fucking say God or don't say God. Like if that's the way the mechanism works, that's fucked.
Wait, hang on. Yes, I agree with that. But just that point of like, I want to make it more clear of like, what does it mean to accept God? It's like, accept you are God, or you have that responsibility, accept that point within you, and then start acting as it.
Like if
Right.
God was in your body with the limitations of your body, what would God do? And that's like, if you listen to Divinity on Earth, Bernard has a great interview on there. I think that's the one.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's the one, right? It's just so obvious. So, and then study Heaven's Journey to Life, and you'll understand the whole progression point of how it all works. So it's cool.
Well, what's interesting with it too is like when you deny life, like when you go to the antithesis of life itself, right? And I think that'd be a cool distinction to just hear, where I don't think it's a 1-for-1 replacement, where you could go like everything in the CTMU where he says God if you just switch it to life. But I think it is
See, I
important.
looked at that, but it's like, but there's something subtle where it becomes like a higher power thing, like
Right.
instead of a equality. So if you look at it as
Right.
life, it's like the universe is a living being, and actually there's a really great Destiny interview on Equoff about, it's called God Loves You, Yes You. Right. And it talks about, I don't know if, I mean, it's like 479, or I don't know what number it is. Right. It's just where when you say God versus when you say life, and I was talking with Avery about it, and he goes, the murderer has life equal to you have life, to the non has life.
Mhm.
And so now it's like, interesting. That's like the guy who rejects God, who says, I don't believe in God, has life equal to the guy who says, I believe in God and I accept God.
Right.
So it's not about God, it's about life. And it's about, what is life? What is the purpose of life? Like, what is not the purpose, but what is the directive of life? What is life doing here? What is it being used for?
Yeah.
Right. And so my point just being, if anybody were to study that stuff or anything, or they're on the fence about the God point and say like, oh, you guys self-perfect, or maybe just me in particular, like you reject God and you guys don't like anyone who talks about God or believes in God. It's like, I'm not against God. What I'm against is the avoidance of responsibility for what we create as human beings through words here on earth, and what we accept and allow, whether it's you don't believe in God or whether you do believe in God. It's like you could use it as an excuse either way. You could say you believe in God and then, oh, I'm fine. See, I'm good. And then it's like, okay, there was an interesting point. And see, this is one of the problems I saw also. And I want to see what you guys think about this. He said, he said, it's evil to blame God or the concept of God for the evil in the world. Because like someone like Richard Dawkins, who rejects God, right?
Mhm.
He's like, they would say, well, why does God allow evil in the world?
Mhm.
Right. And so that's God's fault. And so it's like, he's like, that's not the fault of God. God, and I don't know if whether it was Chris Langan that said this or one of the people who follows him or whatever, but they're like, God has to allow if God allows free choice, then that allows for the possibility of evil. Right. Okay. But what does it mean for me to live as my highest identity as God then?
So that's interesting, because I'm like,
Yeah, go ahead.
from the perspective of like, you can't blame God for the evil in this world. I actually agree with that, right? Because it's like, we are creating the evil in this world.
Sure, 100%. Yeah. Whether
Right.
there is God or isn't God, we are the ones allowing it. Right.
Right. But then this point of like free choice is like, then if you don't want evil in this world, you have to make the choice to do what's best and not be evil, which is turning your back on life, which is obvious.
But is it even just not be evil?
Well, not allow evil.
I mean, wouldn't you agree? Like, should you allow someone to rape a child?
No.
But doesn't God?
Doesn't our system? Yes.
But doesn't God?
Yeah.
Like, does God stop it?
No.
So who fucking gives you permission to stop this person's free choice when even God doesn't?
Mm.
So how can you both identify your highest identity as God and live as a human being who's moral?
Wow. Yeah.
Like, if you had the power of God, would you stop all child suffering today? If you had the physical ability, not if you were God, if you had, as a human being, the physical ability to stop it, would you?
Here's where the cognitive dissonance comes in. And you're like, yeah, but I don't know all the things that God knows. Like he has
Right.
some
And that's
bigger
where it goes
plan.
into this bullshit, like fucking like, right. So you don't fucking, what do you mean you
That
don't
would-
know?
that
What do you
would
mean you
be
don't
like-
know God? Like God is just an identity, but
Okay,
God
so
knows everything. Okay. So
that's exactly the point of like the emperor's new clothes. It's like, oh yeah, the emperor is wearing these beautiful threads that you can't see. And you're like, yeah, like the emperor is just like so much higher than I am. And I just, you know, I'm not gonna speak out and say like I can't see the fucking clothes. There's just something that he's smarter than I am. He's beyond me. He's more powerful. And just the emperor's wearing some beautiful threads, and like you can clearly see his dick hanging out. You know, and you're like, that's beautiful. It's oh wow, wow. I wish I could have clothes like that. You know, that's pretty much what people are saying when they say, oh, it's just beyond me. But literally, then you don't even take the responsibility, because what you're basically saying is you are inferior to life, which if you are somebody who believes in God in that sense, then you're saying that God is creating like a being, or you, or has created you to be dumb, or created you to be less than, created you to be inferior, created
Right.
you to not be equal. And a lot of people will readily admit that too. A lot of
but
people,
from what I understand from the CTMU points, that's not the point of it. It's not like, oh, you're an inferior creature that's less than God. He said God is your highest identity.
Mhm.
So you can't use the excuse then.
Right.
You can't say,
But
well,
I'm
I'm
saying
not
it
God,
just-
so I don't know what. No, I know you're not saying
Okay.
that, but
Okay.
it's like I can't say, well, God's just a higher power. He just knows everything. It's like, yeah, he does. Okay, so he knows everything. All right. So why do you exist?
God knows that, not me. That's a God question.
But it's like, so you are just an object. You're not a being in yourself then.
But look at how much you can get away
Aren't you
with.
made in the image of God? So you're an image. What is an image?
Yeah.
It
It's-
really means
it's not-
you're an example of God.
Yeah.
So the way I would look at it is to map it backwards. Instead of going, God is so amazing and we're so flawed, I would go, okay, we're obviously very flawed. We allow a lot of shit. So what does that imply about God?
Right.
And then to use the excuse of, but God's so amazing and great and he allows it, therefore I should allow it. It's like, maybe if you didn't allow it and I didn't allow it and everyone didn't allow it, guess what?
God wouldn't allow
God wouldn't allow it.
it. Right.
So it's like, it's seeing God as a separate thing rather than actually just the highest version of us. It's a
It wouldn't-
reflection of us, it's not only the cause of us.
It's-
It's
so
like
it's-
we
so-
are also affecting God. We are also being, you see what I'm saying? We are
When you say-
are his nature.
When you say highest version, there's a vocabulary there that's like, most people highest version, they go to superior, right? It's higher.
And
Right.
inherently good.
Right.
Because
Right.
Versus-
That's the problem. Yeah.
That's like the
Ver-
huge part that Bernard talks about. It's like
Yeah.
you're automatically assuming that the natural being of a person is good, but it's like there is absolutely no evidence.
Which is
of
the
that
whole hierarchy
whatsoever.
program.
Right.
Like you assume the priest is a great guy because he's a priest and he's better than you and he's in a higher position than you. And it's like, and they can get away with anything because of that.
But
The same
it's-
thing with teachers. The parents assume the teacher is somehow better. You know, like when the teacher goes to parent teacher conference, and it's like,
Yeah.
now you're the kid all of a sudden.
Right.
Because that's how
right.
you got programmed. It's like the teacher doesn't fucking remember that video I played with the teacher going, so katoa, so and I was just
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Jesus, man.
But it also, so okay, implied within that is like inherently good, better, superior, all of that, like highest. It's like, but the way that it should be looked at is the it's the collective, it's the collection of all of our interactions, which at the quote unquote highest point, or rather at the point where it all comes together, the culmination of it all comes together. This is what's created, God, right? This creates the system. It's literally just like when we talk about the system, it's like the collection of all of our acceptances, allowances, interactions, our own secret thoughts even are part of that system. We are not separate from that system, which is, again, the mind is not separate from us. It is a part of us. It's like we are all interacting together, which creates what we've given complete carte blanche to, God, right? And because when you say God, you can just, how a lot of people use it is like, oh, God can handle that. It's basically, I don't fucking know, and I am not really interested in investigating that and doing anything towards that.
Right, because you've already been sold on the idea that you're gonna have bliss when you die because you go to heaven. So it's like, fuck, I've already given up.
See, but that in itself is a choice. It's a choice that the person's making, that is what is important to them. And that's the part that's not questioned. It's like, oh, well, I mean, but of course I should be allowed to want that. But you're not in, there was this really cool point I was looking at, the idea, because I was listening to one of these interviews with this Chris Lang guy, and he was saying something about God loves you. And you should love God as he loves you. And I was looking at that point of like, when Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. And I was like, wow, like I should love reality. Because reality allows me to be here and experience myself. And therefore I should appreciate it. And I should, like, reality is giving us everything. So why shouldn't we be willing to give everything to reality? Instead, we're like, no, it's for me, it's mine. I need to get this little thing. And it's like, but reality as a whole does not do that.
Right.
And so there is like these interesting aspects from religion of like, God is unconditionally loving and allows for free choice. And like a lot of that stuff is really cool. It's just the problem comes in when you turn into a hierarchy and an avoidance of responsibility. And people, without realizing it, utilize the concept of God, in fact, to be self-interested while they're maintaining the idea that they're serving God and loving God. But they're not looking at their responsibility as God, even though I was getting distracted by what you guys were typing. So it's like, you don't need to accept God or reject God. That's not the criteria upon which you, like, if you were making up the rules and you were being self-honest and you were being fair, not just fair, but you were doing what made sense, would the criteria be, okay, if you believe in God and you accept God, then you should continue to exist? How does that benefit reality? Unless accepting God implies something more than just accepting God, whatever the fuck. Because is it possible to accept God from a language perspective, saying you accept God, but then still do things that make no fucking sense? So accepting God can't just be an acceptance verbally or mentally of God. It has to be something that implies something about how you act, behave, what you allow, what you don't allow.
I like the point that you said about like loving reality and giving back to reality. Like I see it like, if you were in heaven, let's say, right, and you were actually enjoying, like even in your own house, right, you're there in your house, you love your house, you appreciate like all the things that your house provides for you, And then you have other people in this house as well, but they're starting to like draw on the like graffiti on the walls of your house, and like they're like destroying the furniture. Wouldn't you, or just leaving messes everywhere? Wouldn't you be like, hey guys, like we have a beautiful house here that is supporting us, that allows us to get out of the rain, allows us to be protected from predators. It's like, come on, like clean that up. Don't make this mess. Like, I need you all on the same page, and you need them to understand to the extent that you understand, so that it's not just like they're doing it because you said to do it, but because they're like, oh no, you're right. Like, hey, listen, you're either going to have to start cleaning up after yourself, taking care of this house so we can continue living in this house, because if you don't, we're going to destroy this house. We're not going to have any place to live, or you're going to have to go fucking outside and live outside. And then you're going to live in hell, but you're creating hell inside this house right now, right? That's essentially what the responsibility of us who are living here on this earth is right now. We have the responsibility of going to everyone who we can see, and even ourselves. We're like, you know, I was a messy fucking person. My fucking room had ants crawling because I would just leave food under the table or under the bed or whatever. And it's like, okay, but I clean that up. And I see you've got ants, and I'm not judging you for having the ants, under your bed, but we can clean this up, and you can live in a much more enjoyable environment for yourself, and it'll make the environment more enjoyable for everyone else in this house as well, right? That's the responsibility that we have here on this planet of, okay, I realized that I was living in a way that I didn't really understand what I was doing. I didn't understand why I was here. I didn't understand what the point was. And I think, that was kind of by design of the people who lived in this house before me. That was by their design, because they're like, yeah, I can pretty much, like, if I let everybody live in their part of the house the way that they do, I get to have all the rest of this house, and I get them to work for me, so that, I never have to do anything, and they just prepare things for me in this house, right? Where we can actually make a huge difference, not just a difference, but actually create heaven on earth. That's really what we're here to do.
Yeah.
Heaven is not, like Mitch was saying, this place where you die and then you get some bliss or whatever. That's just imagining in your mind and believing that your mind is separate from the physical reality, and you're just going to you're hyper focused on one little aspect. You're hyper focused on one Lego block in the whole reality of the universe, and that Lego block is really insignificant at the end of the day, because it's not connected to any of the other Lego blocks. It's like, okay, yeah, that, but like, you didn't really construct this or build this properly. You didn't see how this is connected to that or that. And to simplify it, it just is, okay, we can actually have heaven, the heaven that you imagine, the heaven that you've been sold on. It's not somewhere else. It doesn't exist yet. It's here, but we have to create it. And
well, hang on. I think there's an important distinction. We do have it already. It's a seed within us, and we're expanding it. We haven't necessarily seen all the unfolding of it, but it's like we see it within the principles. We see it within this community and your relationship with Christine, right? And the fact that we have these kids here. Like, we have the vocabulary, we have the tools. It's a slight distinction, but it's an important distinction. It's like, it is here. We're expanding it.
Okay, so we bought the land, we've started construction, and hey, if you'd like to come support us and build on this land, we can get it done a lot faster.
But you know what, though? It's like, I'm not disagreeing with you. That's a dimension of it. But there's an even more fundamental point, which is like, we just have to align our vocabulary. Because it's the words that are creating reality. and I'm saying that because people might feel like it's a lot of hard work to try to create this heaven. And that's kind of what the whole transhumanism, it's like we have to construct these machines and artificial intelligence to create this heaven-like experience. It's far more simple than that. It's us aligning our language, our vocabulary with we are equal to life, we value life equally, and what is the highest expression of life? It is doing what is best for all. Because if you were to look at it from that perspective, we've already got everything we fucking need for that. It already exists physically, technologically, and can we improve upon it? Absolutely. But like I don't live in a house like that's I don't live in fucking I don't live in Bill Gates fucking like
compound 30 million.
You know what I mean? Where it's you
Yeah.
just got to imagine it's like crazy, like all this great technology, and you know, I'm like, I don't live like that. I live in a normal house with animals, and like it's really great. Like I'm not saying that everyone needs to not have cool technology and stuff. It's just even with just things as they are, we could have amazing experiences in lives, but it won't matter how much technology we have. It's the relationships that we have with ourselves and with the technology, because more technology has created more hell. I'm not blaming technology. It's our relationship to it. The technology is used to exploit and to, I mean, it's just the whole religion point, isn't it? It's the same thing. It's like, it's just a way of utilizing something to gain power for some few. I don't know if I shared this. Did I send y'all that video about Korea? I watched this cool video somebody made about Korea being like the actual, no, not Chick Korea. I have some of his albums though. It's pretty good.
Which
shit.
one? North or South?
South Korea, right?
Mm.
And they were saying how, like, you know, in dystopian stuff, it's always like this kind of Japanese influence. If you watch like Blade Runner, there's like Japanese stuff or whatever. I don't know. There's always that. Actually, even in Snow Crash, isn't there sort of like a Japanese influence into it?
Neo Tokyo, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Actually, anyways, I was about to go on some whole thing. He was saying the place that's actually more actual tech dystopia, cyberpunk dystopia, is Korea. And he showed this example with Japan, how after the war, like they started going nuts in terms of like technology, production, manufacturing. They were like they seemed like they were on a trajectory. They became the second biggest economy in the world. But then it stagnated. And so like, here's the US, here's Japan. It was like, ooh, and then it was something like this. And he said, but he's like, so it didn't really pan out to be it's like this kind of weird, we still associate that cyberpunk type thing with Japan. But anyways, he was giving context where it's actually Korea. And he said, did you know, okay, do you know where Samsung is from? Korea, right? South Korea. You know that they represent 25% of the South Korean economy?
Oh, wow.
And he was saying, by contrast, Walmart, which is the biggest employer, I think in the world, but also in the US, only is like 2.5% of the US economy, apparently. I mean, that's just what he was saying. Wow. 25%. So he was like, imagine the fucking sway and hold that Samsung has over the South Korean like government, everything. You know what I mean? And he was saying, like, if you ask children when they grow up what they want to be, he's like, more often than not, they'll say, I want to work for Samsung. And he's like, and he showed they have like 80 subsidiaries. They have like life insurance. They have manufacturing. They have not just the phones and the technology. That's like one aspect of Samsung, right?
Oh, wow.
And he was talking about how like there was like the head of Samsung who was worth like 7.9 billion. He had been like found guilty of bribing like the government and like for like $25 million, like a lot, right? And he got pardoned and stuff. So like how the rules don't apply to them and all these different things, right? But then they were also talking about, yeah, I mean, why do you think he bribed? That's how they work. But they were talking about the exams they have. They have this exam once a year in Korea where it's kind of like the SAT type thing, but it determines like, I guess what university you go to, whatever. And it's like a 9-hour exam. and they said they shut down traffic. They shut down air flights. So like they don't distract the children, like taking the exam and shit. And it basically determines everything, and their school day is 11 hours. And then they go to private cram school after that at a certain age, right? Why did I bring that up? Oh, because we're talking about the technology stuff, right?
Mhm.
Like they're super highly advanced technologically. I mean, I think their Wi-Fi is like just like anywhere you go is like super fast fucking Wi-Fi, and it's like, but everybody's just hyper competing to fucking get the good job, to work for the tech company that is controlling everything. So that everybody wants to work for the tech company, and yeah, what are you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, it's like, I saw Joel Salatin this weekend, and he had made this really great point of when he was in school, when he was going, I think when he was graduating from high school, he went to see his counselor for like, oh, what kind of job are you gonna get, or what are you interested in, and that sort of thing. And he said to his counselor, like, I want to be a farmer. And he said the woman just about fell out of her chair and had a heart attack. Like, oh, with all this intelligence and all these smarts, and you're just going to be a lowly farmer. And he's like, that's the perception that people have of. And he was making the case for how important farming is.
Well, ironically, now like Bill Gates, one of the smartest, I don't know if he's smartest, but whatever people in the world, is like literally buying up all the farmland and like controlling our farms. And
right. But
he's like, I'm going to be a farmer.
But okay, consider that, because Joel Salatin's like in his like 60s or something like that. And he's saying back then when he was in high school, so about 40 years ago,
yeah,
they were, the way they looked at farmers was like, oh my gosh, like you got to be dumb to be a farmer or some shit like that. And he was making this point of, so he's making 2 points. One was, so you're saying the pinnacle of life, or the pinnacle of intelligence, is to drive through traffic, clock in, sit at a cubicle all day, and just punch some numbers in on a computer. Like that's the pinnacle of intelligence and life in high society. Like, what the fuck? And the other point that he was making was, we have come to value farming so little that it's devalued our food, devalued the labor that goes into things that are actually keeping us alive, devalued the earth, the soil, the air, the water, all of that. It's been devalued because we look at it like it's a lowly job, it's beneath us and all this. And it's funny because I was talking to some other guys who they're in the trades, like construction and things like that, and they're like, yeah, it's crazy, nobody wants to do this anymore. And this is literally what creates all the buildings around you. It's literally what creates, like, you have electricity in your home, you need somebody to do that. You need plumbing, you need somebody, you need welding, you need somebody to do that. And it's just like, it's not that, oh, now everybody should go do a trade, obviously not, but it's like that point of what you're saying with Samsung. You have all this intelligence and it's all fueled towards go get a job. It's not actually fueled towards what does this world need. It's not fueled towards okay, what can I do creatively, constructively, that would support and give real value to someone. It's all turned inward on how can I get the most value from the skill set that I have, or just going to this job or whatever, right? And again, it's funny because to me, it's like there's a specific point of you're doing something that's valueless. Oh, because I saw a meme with this. I saw this meme, and the meme was this person had gone and studied and got like a PhD in Egyptology or something like that, right? And then there's no job out there for an Egyptologist. Yeah. There's nothing to do. So what they did was they created a school, or a class anyway, where they could give a PhD course on Egyptology. So they've got other students buying into their course. And it's literally like, it's a pyramid scheme for something that means absolutely nothing.
Literally pyramids.
It's literally pyramids, But like it's funny because that is what our society is based on. You have no actual fucking value, and then you get other people to buy into your no value shit. And now, like, we're creating no value on top of no value on top. That's what, if you look at the whole thing with TikTok or Instagram, it's like all these people are creating these videos that have no fucking value to them at all
Right.
whatsoever. And then, like, you consume it, you get no value out of it. But then because you've consumed it and like, oh, what's the least amount of value that I can give to somebody that they'll consume this entertainment? They get money from that somehow. You know, they figured out a way to monetize that. And
How
then
do
it's
people
just
make
like,
money from TikTok?
I
Just
don't know.
views. If you get enough views, they'll pay you.
I
But-
guess so.
But how does TikTok make money then?
Advertisements.
Ads. I want to run
Are
ads
there
on
ads on
TikTok.
TikTok?
Yeah, every time you're scrolling, like every once in a while, it'll be like a sponsored ad, but it looks
Okay.
like a regular TikTok video.
Got
like,
it. Okay.
So Christine,
I didn't even think about that. I'm like, how do
Christine-
they get ads on
yeah.
a TikTok? But now that makes sense.
she had TikTok, and then like I would scroll through it and I'd be watching a video and she'd be like, stop it, you're watching an ad. I'm like, oh, I didn't even know.
Like, oh shit.
Actually,
You're
but I
no,
like
I'm
the
not. I
ad.
just want to buy what this person's talking about on their TikTok.
I thought it was an actual video. I was like curious to see what happened, you know.
isn't that interesting?
Yeah, but the point being is like we've created a society where that is totally acceptable within the rules of our society, is to do something of no actual value, but because you can get money out of it, it's like we continue devaluing reality and life and just value money, which really doesn't have any value except for the value that we give it, because animals don't give a fuck about money. Like, you ever try to feed a deer $100? They don't take it. They don't want it. They don't care.
My
Right.
pigs might eat that.
Maybe.
Free food.
No, actually, they probably wouldn't. Hey,
Yeah,
you know,
they-
actually, something interesting. This is kind of off topic, sort of, but the other day, I saw one of our chickens was like all messed up. Like it was sitting in one of the water like the water tanks,
Sure.
like feeding for like the cow. It
Yeah.
was just like sitting in there, and I was like, "What the fuck is this?" So I took it out, and it was just kind of like being really slow, and like a lot of its feathers were missing, but it wasn't like clearly cut or anything. And then like the roosters immediately started jumping on it and everything, and I was just like, that thing's fucked. So I was just like, you know what? I don't know what's going on with this chicken. So I took it over and I just took the axe, the hatchet, chopped off its head, and I threw its body in there with the pigs. And immediately the chickens come over, start pecking at like the chicken, like trying to eat it. You know, the pigs come over and start eating it. And I thought that was so interesting because I'm like, they know it's not alive anymore.
Mhm. That's interesting. Yeah.
How do they know it's not alive? How do they know it's dead?
Yeah.
I don't have an answer for it. I just thought that was really interesting because I'm like, because before they wouldn't have just like, oh, there's a chicken there. Like even when it was kind of like sitting there, not really moving, they weren't like, oh, let's eat it. But as soon as I killed it, they were like, oh, cool, let's eat it. You know, I'm like, that's so interesting. Like there's something where they know it's not alive anymore. I don't know. You know, probably.
You got to listen to consciousness of the chicken. That shit's fire. It's amazing. I'm not even kidding. But I want to just hit on this one other point for people to see is like, if you've ever been to a clubhouse and you've seen the brochure, you'll see that at the very top is the word live, the acronym live. It's the word, which stands for life I value equally. And when you look at the world right now and all the bullshit with the TikTok or the South Korean kids being programmed to want to go get a job at Samsung or whatever, it's like Drake was saying, it's like life has become devalued. Yet, for those of you listening, you still got that spark of life within you. You're not like the dead chicken with its head chopped off. It's like, you know that there's something so much more you can do with your life. It's like, that is the journey that we're all on. And the more you can get yourself to really come to the understanding that it's not just you having to go out there and like talk to people and like somehow convince people and magically you're going to like make a big change. It's the more you can be systematic in your approach with how do you talk to people? Where do you lead people to? If you're not running a local clubhouse, like if you're not coming on the Friday calls, you're not utilizing this podcast, like there's so much you can do. So when you go out there living, you're not like a, little pawn running on the front lines, going to get gunned down by the world system. It's like you're prepared. You got a backpack full of stuff you need. You got tools in your tool belt. It's like you're going out there and you can then stay out there all day sharing with people. And then you can empower them and you have enough stuff to give to them. And then
Well,
they
if
go
you
out
have
there
a
and then they go.
church, if you have a
Was it?
church, if you have a church, people will go there.
Mhm,
If you don't, you're just going to talk to them and then they're going to go off about their merry way.
mhm.
So that's the difference with a system versus just, I'm just trying to randomly convince people or something.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then when you're also living, they're seeing that, oh, wow, you have stability I don't have. I know you have to go in a minute, Mitch,
Mm.
or maybe right now, I don't know. But I just wanted to say this real quick because somebody messaged me. I won't say who, but they said, what's the purpose of creating heaven on earth if it's all our last life? They didn't want to put it on the chat. But they said they want more context. So I'll just answer it here. What's the purpose of creating heaven on earth if it's all our last life? But look at that life I value equally. When you say it's my last life, does that mean life is not going to exist anymore? So what is the purpose of creating heaven? I'm not asking it. I'm just saying it rhetorically, but if you guys want to answer, obviously you're welcome to, but I'm just saying it. My answer is rhetorical. Like when you say, well, it's my last life. So what's the point? What does it mean when you say it's your last life? Like, does that mean because you believe you don't exist or something that therefore there's no more life? What does it mean, your last life? How are you defining your life? Like, what does that mean? Any thoughts?
Yeah, that's obviously like, I mean, to not be harsh about it, but be direct. It's like, that is your mind speaking. Your mind
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
just saying like, this is my last life versus like, you don't see yourself as equal to life.
But think about the question. Okay. So actually, there's a, I don't know if it's like a logical fallacy or something. I forget. I remember one of these audios, probably one of y'all listened to, where the guy says, somebody says like, what do I care what happens in 1,000 years? I think it was on one of the Jordan Peterson ones or something, right? Like, why should I worry about this particular problem that's not going to have an effect for 1,000 years from now or something like that? And it's like, I'll be dead and gone. And they were like, well, but 1,000 years from now, you won't be there, right? So why is that a criteria that's relevant to you? 1,000 years from now doesn't apply to you.
Right.
What applies to you is the life you're in now. So you're like, well, what's the purpose of creating heaven on earth if this is my last life? Because when I'm dead, that won't matter to me then. Right. So then why are you even thinking about that? Why are you not just focused on what are you doing here in your life now? So now,
who are you?
What's the purpose of creating heaven on earth, considering you're alive? That's how I would look at it, not considering when I'm not alive anymore. Like, what's the alternative? Not create heaven on earth, not do what is best. So you're really just asking the question, what's the purpose of doing what's best?
Yeah. It's a really,
what if it wasn't your
interesting.
last life?
Yeah.
What if what you think is heaven is you actually just get reincarnated into another body here, and then you're like, fuck, I got born in South Korea.
I mean, like realistically speaking, the most practical way I look at that is that you can't blame anyone else for doing anything ever, period. So if somebody rapes your kids, or shoots you.
Okay.
Or,
yeah. Like,
anything
okay,
that,
here's another, and I'm not trying to be like, I get the question. It's just like, here's another way of looking at that question. Why should I eat dinner tonight? If by not eating, and obviously not eating anymore, I'm just going to die. And then after that, I won't care. And yet you will eat dinner tonight and you will sustain your life and you will keep trying to sustain your life until you die, not of your own choice. So my question to you is, what's the purpose of continuing to live when you are going to die? Why not just die now? What you're taking the choice and the action to eat and to, bathe and all these things, right? Why not just allow yourself to die? You might say, well, I don't want to experience pain and suffering. Why create heaven on earth? Like, well, why not do what is best? That's the real question. Why not do it?
Yeah. See you, Mitch. I know you gotta go.
He said he wants us to share about the event. I
Yeah.
mean, if you don't have your tickets yet, you're probably, I mean,
You're
you
probably
could
not
still
coming.
get a ticket. I don't know if there's tickets available.
I don't know. I talked to somebody yesterday who said they were buying their plane ticket yesterday.
They maybe already have a ticket.
They already had a ticket.
They just hadn't made the decision that they're definitely going, even though they bought a ticket, basically.
Yeah. Which is
So if you're in that
silly.
position, like, I mean, come on, like, just do it.
Obviously.
Plane tickets are not that expensive, anyways.
Right. So anyway, yeah, definitely. The event it's gonna be amazing. Just the sheer fact that we're all gonna be there together is amazing in itself.
Like,
It's
that
gonna be
is
fun.
heaven.
Yeah.
Like, what do you imagine heaven is?
I get to play video games all day.
Like, I certainly don't imagine it's like I'm sitting on a cloud in ecstasy. Like, that's because when you get bored of that, and isn't that just like a chemical point? Like, it's not real. Wouldn't it
That would be
include
really
like
funny,
being around other
actually.
people and having fun and building things together and like laughing and telling stories and playing games and like just, it's certainly not being by myself.
Yeah. I never imagined heaven being like on ecstasy. I would it's interesting because I've always imagined it, like you said, with being around other people, things being like,
Doesn't everyone imagine there's other people around?
yeah, there's other people and it's a great time. You're enjoying yourselves, they're enjoying themselves. You're all having like great conversations. It's like you get each other, and you don't. I never imagined it like I'm just on a cloud, like experiencing ecstasy. I do imagine that I feel really great, but it's because of the interactions that I'm having. Because of the different people that are there, because of like the environment that I'm in. It's not just like a um
Imagine
so
you're like, okay, this is my last life, so fuck it, I'm not going to try to do what's best. And that was literally the test. Even if you
wow.
knew it was your last life, you were like, you know what, okay, it's not my last, it's my last life, I'm done after this, but why not this one time actually do what's best and create a world that's best for all? And then it's like, all right, you passed the test. Like, come on.
right the way I look at it is really just like, because I see people always complain about politicians and things like that, and the way that politicians think is my last term. This is my last, I'm not going to be around 50 years from now when this law starts affecting different people or whatever. It's like, okay, but you don't even care about the next generation, your children. You don't care about how you're affecting other people around you. You don't care about anything, really. So if somebody does that to you, and that, like, it's hard for me to compute that.
Like, for those who like Trump, imagine if he was like, you know what, I'm not getting elected again, so let me not fucking make any excuses or any bullshit. Let me just do what I'm thinking I'm going to do this time, the second time, the first time.
Yeah. So, I mean, it is your last life, but who are you? That's the question.
That's the point.
Right? It's like, okay, so when it's your last life,
it's like, I can't answer that question for you.
Right. So when it's your last life, you're just like, fuck, dude. Oh man, I'll tell you.
Party.
I'll tell you a really great story. I remember, and the story came up yesterday because we worked pretty hard throughout the day and we were just exhausted, and then we saw somebody running, and you're like, that person has all the energy in the world, like, but we also were like, how much work did they put in? And I remembered when I was in high school, I was on the wrestling team. Freshman year, I was on the wrestling team. And they would make you do some really grueling stuff on the wrestling team. Like, one of the things was suicides, right? Which is not actually, suicide, but it's basically like you run up and down a court, back and forth, over and over. You're sprinting over and over and over and over again, right? And I remember it was exhausting. We were all tired. And then the coach yelled out, okay, so we're going to do another round whoever is the fastest this round gets to go home. Like you're done, you get to go home. And everyone else, we're gonna have you do some extra whatever, right? And that round, this one kid I remember zoomed past everyone. He was just like, whoa, okay, where did all this energy come from? This guy like crushed everybody. And at the end of that round, the coach said, I knew it. I thought so. You've been holding back this entire fucking time. And when I suggest that you can go home, now you have all the energy and you're watching as all your teammates are giving their best and you're not. You're an asshole. And the coach said, so, you know, because of that, everyone else can go home. You're going to stay. Right. And I was just like, it hit so hard because it was like, yeah, why are you here in the first place? And the coach asked him that. He was like, why are you here? Do you actually want to get better? Do you actually want to be here or not? Because these are the activities of being the best. And if you don't want to do that, just go home. You don't have to be here. Right. And so it put into perspective for me, like, okay, if I'm going to do something, do it. If I don't want to be there, if you don't want to be a part of life, you don't want to give your best, then why are you here? What's the point? You know? So just wanted to share that.
Just real quick, that person messaged me back because they're listening, obviously. I just don't want to say who it is because they didn't obviously put it publicly, but they're saying they're saying that I didn't understand their point. And they said, if all life on earth is doomed, it's all of our last life. I don't care if I'm not there anymore, if we're all not there. Like thinking that if this is your last life means nothing is going to exist anymore. You have a misunderstanding of life, though. Right. Is what that means. Why can't something new emerge? Right. And I would suggest, without giving my full answer, because I'm not trying to tell a person, oh, believe this, what I'm saying. I suggest to listen to here, I'll put it in the chat, Christine, and then you can this one. It's actually a 2-part, but I'll just put the 1 part.
Okay.
That equal. You could put it in the
yeah. In the
like
chat.
the point of like if you are a form and expression that will never do what is best because you are choosing that, because you are not willing to realize yourself as who you are as life, that this is your last life. Like that cannot continue to exist. And I'm not here to tell you, oh, it's okay, you'll continue to exist. It's not about that. It's just, why can't you create heaven on earth and then allow another being to emerge that is actually going to just be in that and accept it and love themselves and realize who they are. Like that's my point. So my question, it's kind of like, yeah, good. Is like, do you think that what's the definition of life that this person is using? Yeah, well, I think they're just having a misunderstanding of like, we're saying, oh, everything, like it's the end of the world. It's the end of the world and nothing is going to exist. And even the context that you think reality is within a reality. It's like Bernard said, like, do you really think that you have access to reality? It's like you're in a containment, right? So this is not what you perceive is not, but the real question is, in whatever context you're in whatever limitation you're in, will you do what is best or not? That's the question. Yeah. And I mean, it's a process. We understand, like, I'm not speaking as like on the other side as like, oh, you'll get it someday. Like I am also in my own process of realizing myself and pushing myself and seeing where I'm weak and have limitations that are not best. And we're all in this together. So I'm not upset, or I don't have a problem if somebody asks that question. It's just really look at it as if anyone's misinterpreting me as saying like, oh, not that I'm trying to stand as the authority who decides what the Destiny material says. I mean, it's there for all of us to look at. But if you're maybe not studying it 100%, and then you're only listening to my interpretation or my explanation, and then from that you're interpreting that I'm saying, or somebody's saying, this is it for life, everything's over. We're creating the conditions so that life can be birthed for real in reality, because whatever is going to be birthed into this current system is just getting brainwashed into thinking that's less than life. So we have to create the conditions so that when beings emerge into this reality, they're like, oh, okay, I know who I am. Cool. Like, it's not like they're immediately being taught that they're less than what they are. And that it's like, I was talking to Max, we were watching this video together on YouTube about this girl who went to Harvard and was talking about, she was like 4 or 5 years out. And she was talking about how competitive it is. I mean, it sounds like duh, but she was like salutatorian of her high school. She was like, how hyper competitive. And so she was just talking about the psychological toll it takes on you to be at a school like that. And there was this point she said about how schooling, something about schooling being about constantly comparing yourself to others. And I was talking to Max about it. I'm like, see, this is the problem with school, is it teaches you that you are only good in comparison to another person, and that the way to be good is to be better than another person. And she was saying, this girl was talking about how the whole context of Harvard is structured like that. Like, even if you just want to join a club, like some random club, like she said, there was one, you have to, so like you want to be in a frat, you got to pledge, you got to go through that process. They narrow it down, they select you, they invite you. She's like, that's how clubs are there. She's like, she wanted to be in this club that teaches dance to like underprivileged children. And she couldn't even qualify for that. And it wasn't because she wasn't a good dancer. She's like, I'm a good dancer. It was that you have to meet the next round of social qualification and this and that. And it's like this really hyper competitive process where the whole point of it is not about let's help kids and whatever. It was about being exclusive for the sake of being exclusive. And like, not everyone is allowed in, no matter what the club is. And she was like, I was not prepared for any of that. Even though I was the most competitive person of her school, or one of the most, when you get there, she's like, that's everyone. And the whole system is like, it's about you being better and getting into something other people can't and so forth. And I'm like, and that's the fucking university that's producing the people that runs the world. And she was saying how it stays with you and you have to like kind of de-brainwash yourself from that way of thinking if you even can. But imagine now you go and work for, I don't know, I was to say Goldman Sachs. I'm not even sure if that exists anymore. I'm assuming it does. I don't know. Like one of these companies or whatever, where it's like, that's still just the name of the game. Yeah. And so even the economy, if you look at it, is structured in a way where it's like, no, it's not for everybody. Like there's a club where everyone is rich and has an amazing life, and not everyone's allowed in. And that's partly why it's so attractive. And it's like, what's the problem with everybody having an amazing life? It's like, well, when you're a part of the club, you'll understand. And it's like, no, dude, fuck that. And I'm glad I wasn't a part of the club, because if I was, I probably wouldn't understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, let's wrap it on that. Hey, this point that you made, Cam, just like all we have to do is align our vocabulary with like, right?
Oh, that was the other thing that Chris Langan said. What's cool points in this thing. He's like, reality is language.
Yes. Yeah.
Language is reality. And he said, reality is, he said, is, how did he say it? It was something like, something about, it's something having a conversation with itself about itself. Like that's what reality is. It's reality is having a conversation with itself about itself. I mean, doesn't that describe you? Yeah. So his whole point is like, actually look at the reality. So don't get trapped up in science, because science is so fucking limited. So even with TechnoTutor, it's like, you don't understand how reality fucking works. So if you try to judge what we're doing based on science, it's like science doesn't even fucking know anything about anything. And I'm not just saying that as a judgment. It will admit that. What's the fundamental unit of reality? We're still trying to figure that out. You should probably figure that out before you fucking start making assumptions about anything. And then the problem is people go, but look, we have this technology. Well, yeah, you can invent something without understanding how it works.
Yeah, wasn't the steamboat invented without understanding
most technology? They don't really fully I don't know if I say most, but a lot of technology is invented before they have the full theory worked out. And then even then they still don't have the theory worked out.
Right.
And that's part of the whole problem with the AI stuff.
Yeah.
Is like, that's definitely a technology that's been created before we really understand what's going on. And what's so fascinating about this recent explosion is all about language. I really
Yeah.
suggest everybody look up, what's the name of that video? It's like Noah Yuval Harari. What's the name of
Something
that
about
video?
AI. I don't remember.
AI.
Something about disaster or something. I don't know. Let me see.
I'll look it up too. See who can get it first.
Probably. Who knows?
Like biggest threat.
Maybe.
Noah Yuval Harari, AI, and the future of humanity. AI and the future of humanity. It's on his channel.
You got it.
It's a really good one. I
Yeah.
really suggest to.
Yeah, definitely would suggest looking at that for sure. The AI dilemma, it's another good one. And also just recognizing, okay, reality is language. We have the ability to expand our vocabulary effectively. And the more that we align ourselves with life, the more power, quote unquote, that we have in our own lives to do the best things, to live the best life, really. And we wouldn't want to live the best life.
Think about it. Instead of accepting God means you accept that there is a God that's a higher power, like you accept it in the sense of like I intellectually or I believe it or something. Instead, you accept God. Like you accept that is who you are, that's your responsibility, and that's what you have to live as. And then you realize, like, okay, yes, I have these physical limitations. But then you realize, okay, what is it that separates God from everything else? Is language. Right? In the beginning was the word. So how can we use language to find others to take on this responsibility and to empower others to be able to realize who they are? Because a child with a high vocabulary, I mean, they're not going to be as susceptible to brainwashing and all this bullshit, you know, and therefore they won't have as many problems, and they will have higher self-esteem. And when you have a high self-esteem, you're okay with other people having a high self-esteem.
Yeah.
You're not threatened by it.
Yeah.
When you have a low self-esteem, you're threatened by other people being equal to you.
Yeah.
All right. I guess that's it.
All right.
Yeah. Well, the event is in 2 days. Well, actually, no, we're all going to be there in 2 days. It starts on next weekend, but we won't have a podcast next Sunday because we'll all be in San Diego.
The podcast will be the event.
Exactly. So
it will
should have
not be
been
live.
there.
Oh, can you guys like Zoom it for me because I can't make it? No.
Yeah, this is going to be the beginning of a 100-year plus vision, actually, though, which is pretty fucking cool. It's like, what is the point of all of us even having kids, for example? It's like we know our kids are gonna outlive us. This is part of that purpose of like forgiving ourselves. It's like it's not about just me and my experience. There's people coming after us. You know what I mean? So that's
and all of this that we're doing is just creating with words.
Yeah.
You could easily use your words against you and be like, oh, who are we? We're not that important. We'll never like make a difference or whatever. And then because of those words in that story you tell yourself, you don't do anything. Or you can be like, no, it's not about the glory. I don't care about that, but I'm here to make a difference. Whether I can or can't is irrelevant. That's what I'm here to do. So let me just do the things that would be that and see how far I can go. And then now we have this event with people coming and it's like, see, we're just doing it. And then that would have seemed like not likely before. But then when we have an event with 10,000 people, the other thing's going to seem nothing. All right. So anyways, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.
Keith says
a
the
lot of fun.
revolution will not be recorded. San Diego. Love it.
Will not be
All right.
live streamed. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll see you guys there. And we'll see you on this podcast 2 weeks from now.
Yep.
Bye.
Right. Bye.